Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the CSS box model. All right. First of all, we're going to just start with this simple paragraph. Okay. So let's look at this and pretend like this is a basic browser window viewport. Okay. Without the title bar and all of the other stuff. It's just the viewport. And we're looking at paragraph text. And the paragraph, you'll notice, takes up, first of all, 100% of the viewport, because right now, if we can imagine, the body tag is the only tag that we have, and then the paragraph is the only tag that we have inside of the body. So that means that the body is the paragraph's parent. All right, we have this child-parent relationship, and the paragraph is the child of the body. That means that it's going to take up 100% of its possible dimension. And the body, of course, is always going to take up 100% of the viewport, because the viewport basically is the body. All right, so we've got this block level element, the paragraph, taking up 100%. Also, I want you to notice that it's sitting right up on the edges of the viewport. So let's just say for right now that we've wiped out any inherent browser style sheet margins or padding or any of that kind of stuff. Okay, this is the native way that it would want to sit right up on the edge of the viewport. Okay, so now let's add a background color to see how it renders. Okay, so you can really see now how much space that paragraph is taking up. All right, every place the entire space of that paragraph is going to be covered in its background color. And so that's how you can kind of tell visually how much space something is occupying. Okay. Now, again, like I had said, this is a block level element, so it's naturally going to take up 100% of its containing parent space, unless it's told otherwise to do something different. So let's set the width now of that paragraph to 50%. It was 100%. Now we're going to explicitly tell it to be 50%. All right, I want you to notice a few things that happens with this block or this box. Okay, the paragraph, whenever we set it to 50%, I want you to notice how the text is forced to wrap sooner. And what it does is that it makes it less wide and it elongates the height. All right, because the height is going to naturally flow to be as big as it needs to be. That's naturally what is going to happen with HTML. Now, secondly, I want you to notice how the element is still sitting on the left edge of the viewport. And lastly, how it's now 50% of its parent, okay? It's not centered, it's still sitting on the edge of the viewport because we haven't told it to be centered. All right, so now that now we can actually see how that background color works. Let's look at how a background image works. All right, so now we've added a background image, and we're doing this, of course, in our CSS. I'm not showing you the actual rules yet, but let's just talk through this process. So add the background image. Well, first of all, I want you to notice that now you can't see the background color, but it's still there. The background color is literally still there, but the picture is sort of sitting on top of it now. So it sort of helps you maybe think a little bit about like a stacking order, a vertical stacking order. You know, we're so used to looking at the web as a flat space that has sort of an X and a Y axis, you know, the X being horizontal, Y being vertical. But if you think of like a third dimension, like the Z axis, all right, then you can sort of have space that you can imagine that's sort of stacked in between like like the way that you're looking at it and having some depth inside of the screen. All right, so it's technically still there, but you just can't see it right now. All right. So to illustrate how these layers stack, let's take what we've done so far and let's explode it a little bit. So this is a visualization of the CSS element of the depth. Okay, so right now what we've got is the same stuff we've been talking about. The top element is that paragraph tag. All right, and you can sort of see it floating on the top visually. The middle is that background image, and the bottom is the background color, almost like these are sort of stacks of either paper or acetate or something like that. So you can kind of visually see what the stacking order is in the box level, or excuse me, in the box model. All right. So now that we've explored the layers of a CSS element, we can take a look at how it expands outward. When I say expands outward, I mean sort of up and down and left and right. All right, so if you go if you want to think back to what we had before, the text was like sitting right up on the edge of everything. But now if we add padding to all four sides of that paragraph, I want you to notice how the element's text is no longer sitting on the edge of the element's perimeter. All right, adding padding expands and increases the overall interior dimensions of the element with this standard CSS2 rendering. Okay, I want to show you something. So now you can sort of visually see, you can visualize what it's doing, right? So it's adding interior space to this element, and you'll notice that like the background image, for instance, is visible in those interior spaces where the padding is, okay? And that's how you know it's padding as opposed to something like a margin. All right, and you'll also notice that the overall width of the element is greater than 50% now. Okay, we told it to be 50%, but now what we've done is we've added 10% in padding all the way around, right? Well, that's going to add 10% on the left and 10% on the right. That gives us now a total of 70%. All right, that's something that's kind of important because sometimes, like with CSS2 models, you want to tell something to be a certain width, and then you add padding, and then boom, you have this problem that it's bigger than you intended it to be. Okay, so let's now look at how we can extend our visual edge of the element out a little further by adding a border. And I want you to realize this and think about this. The border is literally the very edge of the element's boundary. Okay, so now you can see what we had before, and now what we have is with this boundary. All right, but ideally an element like this one would also need margins added because it doesn't look that great whenever it's hugging the the edges of other elements, especially now that it has a border. So in this example, the paragraph tag is still hugging the left edge of its parent, which is the body tag, okay? So the way that we can get that off the edge of the left and off the top if we want to is we can add margins to the paragraph. All right, and this is what it does when we add margins. Notice what we've done. We've added margins to the top and bottom by 10%, and then left and right, what we would have done in the CSS is given it a value of auto. So the property name would be margin, and the value for top and bottom would be 10%, and the value for left and right would be auto. All right, so the way that that works is like this. Because we are saying auto, what that does is the browser can automatically do some mathematical calculations. It'll look at the size of the parent. In this case, the parent is the body or the viewport. And technically, if we have control of the viewport and how we resize it, we can make it narrower or wider. And what the browser is able to do is, in real time, constantly calculate the width of that parent, which is the viewport. And it'll take that and it'll subtract the width of the paragraph tag that we've set, right? And then it'll get the difference of that, and automatically, because we've set it to auto, it'll automatically take that remainder and it'll divide it in half, and it'll take half of it and apply the half of what's left to the left margin and half of what's left to the right margin, so that it's constantly in balance, like this push-pull, right? And it's always going to stay centered like that. And that only really works for the left and right. It doesn't really work for top and bottom, just so you know. Okay, but now look what we've got. All right, this is something that maybe we weren't really predicting. Okay, so after adding the padding and borders, we're far off from our original goal of achieving an overall 50% width, right? You'll notice that now we have approximately 70% plus about 4 pixels in our width of the entire element. And then for the margins, we ended up with approximately 15%, right? Depending on the width of the browser, but it's still in percentages, so it's still about 15%. That's not 50% for the element, right? We're at 70 plus 4 pixels. So let's talk about box sizing. All right, box sizing is a CSS3 property that now is safe to use in modern browsers, and there is a value that if you use, it's called border box. What it does is, all right, it's going to allow you to set a width, an overall width that you want the element to be, and it will incorporate any padding plus the border, like anything that's interior, so padding up to the border. It'll actually take the values of those things and it'll calculate it as part of the element, and then it'll do an overall width, and it does the math for you, so that if you tell that box to be 50%, and then you go and you tell it to have 10% padding on the left and right, and then have a border of 4 pixels wide, what it'll do is it'll take that extra padding and that extra pixel dimension for the border, and it incorporates it in the size, and it will do the math so that you don't have to figure out what, you know, the margins are actually supposed to be and what the size is really supposed to be for the element. Let's take a look at how that worked. Okay, so all we would have done in the CSS to achieve this is add the property of box sizing with the value of border box to the element. All right, and so now you can see that it really did take the 50% width, and it automatically now can apply 25% to either side on the left and right so that it constantly stays center, and it does all of our math for us properly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end this here, but that is a really good introduction to sort of how you can start to visualize things in the box model in terms of the interior space with padding, the perimeter space on a border, and the exterior space with margins, and you know, basically the way that things are going to interact with each other in the box model.